Your experience is often a much better guide for decisions than rules. When we're talking to children, we tend to give them rules, and that can become too inflexible. We have to support our children in getting better at thinking for themselves. And I think we live in a society where we take many of those opportunities away from children. It's helping them to track, to be curious about how things are working out for themselves, so that fast forward, they can start to make decisions about how they feel and how they see the world. The danger is that we don't teach them that. They rely on others to tell them what the right decision is.
So Emma, welcome to Decisions That Count. I'm really excited about this one, mainly because I feel like I need help in this area. So before we get into it and dive into the first question, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your work and your background?
So I'm a clinical psychologist. I was trained in the UK. I've been living in Singapore now for 13 years, and I am a parent of 3 children, 15, almost 13, and 9. At the moment, I primarily work with couples and individuals, but my background is working with children and families. That's what I used to do back in the UK. And until my children got a bit older, and I found that actually the problem with working with children is that you never see your own. It's the afternoon job, it's the Saturday shift. So I decided that actually I was going to work more with couples. And it's been a fantastic journey. I really love working with couples. And incidentally, you also support children through the couples work, because when we have a solid relationship, children fare better. I'm half British, half Spanish. And I grew up as a third culture kid. So we moved around 8 times before I got to studying in the UK. Yeah. I'm very familiar with this sort of beautiful mix of having, multiple identities in terms of your own cultural backdrop, but also living in cultures that are very different from your own. And I think that gives us lots of strengths and some struggles too, which I often talk about in the clinic room. Those of us who are expats in Singapore.
Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about how we can help our children make better decisions. Yeah. How we can empower them to make decisions.
Yes.
I'm just going to get straight in to the first question. How should parents think differently about decision making in children as their brains develop?
I'll just sort of backtrack a little bit when it comes to thinking about actually how we parent our children. I really love the model of self-efficacy. So we think about self-efficacy, we're thinking about sort of 3 core needs that we have as adults and as children too. One is for autonomy, to feel like, we can do things for ourselves. The second is around competence, that we're capable. And the third one is around relatedness. I'm sure you can relate to those 3 components, right? How important it is to feel like I have autonomy and a sense of control over my world. I am capable. I can get things done, and I'm connected. I have a sense of belonging. These concepts apply to us at work, in our relationships, and in our parenting. So coming back to decision making, for me, it's really important that from a very young age, children start to feel a sense of autonomy. They start to feel like they get to have a say, and that they're capable of making decisions and making good decisions. And of course, that they feel connected to us. So when we think about decision making in children, obviously we always need to adapt it to what they're capable of. We're not going to ask a toddler to decide whether, it's time to go to bed or not. But we can give them decisions that they are capable of making. And I do think, and I do see this in our practice, and I think it's happening more and more, is that we actually don't give children enough opportunities to exert their independence. Because how do we make good decisions? Often it's from off the back of making many bad ones. We learn to make decisions, as in we learn to figure out what's good for us, who we are, what matters. That famous quote by Buddhist quote, the path is made by walking. We have to support our children in getting better at thinking for themselves. And I think we live in a society where we take many of those opportunities away from children. And I'm not saying, really, really key decisions like, whether to have dinner or not, or, perhaps important ones on when to leave to go to school. But even the smallest of decisions, like whether to, eat a banana or eat, a granola bar, whether to, wear a skirt or wear trousers. These are little decisions, but it gives them a sense of agency and a sense of competence. When I lived in London and I had a toddler, everybody's familiar with the battle on putting the coat on. And I would not choose that battle. I'd give him agency and say, okay, let's not put the coat on. And he'd go out and inevitably find out that he's actually quite cold. And what does he learn from that? That I need to wear a coat, even though I don't want to. It's actually quite useful. It gets cold. And as a parent, I have to be comfortable with him being cold. And I have to navigate some of my own anxiety around him making a bad decision. As long as that bad decision doesn't have huge consequences for me. I think as parents, we probably need to get better at doing that and giving them some autonomy. Again, around, we talk about sort of natural contingencies a lot in my line of work, where we learn from the consequences of our actions. We don't want our children to take terrible risks, and the consequences are tremendous. But actually getting to learn about themselves involves them making poor decisions. Mm-hmm. Saying no when they should have said yes. Not asking for help when actually they really did need it. So yes, I don't know if that answers a very long answer to your question, but it's sort of a reframe, I think, for us as parents around making good decisions, what that takes.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that story. As a parent, I found, though, it was like a interesting transition. And I guess I struggled with it too, when the child is younger and you just put the jacket on, or you just feed the child, right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden it's I do, right? And so that transition, maybe it wasn't abrupt, but it seemed abrupt for me as a parent. Just all of a sudden it's like they're completely dependent upon you, to now they're this little human. And it's sometimes tough to relinquish those, that kind of control to it. Even the jacket questions. We just went back to Canada, and my kids had never worn a jacket before, right? And it's minus 35. And I admit that I'm like, it was a fight for the jacket, but I was just frustrated. I'm like, fine, go outside then. You're going to learn. So glad to hear that was a good decision to make.
Yeah. I don't know if I would send my kids out in minus 30.
It didn't last very long.
No, I can imagine, yeah.
They learned real quick. But no, it's interesting. I noted as a parent just how fast that happens, and I wasn't prepared for it. That agency, the I do attitude, that they want that. So
yeah. I
don't know if you felt that with your kids.
Yeah, I feel like we're going into a next stage though now, where it's like they're pushing us to make more decisions themselves. So I think rather than us kind of coming home and being like, okay, you can have for your snack, you can have like fruit stick, you can have some fruit, or you can have some vegetable sticks. They're like, no. Like normally when they're a toddler, that's their choice and that's their decision. For sure. You've set that boundary and that's their decision. Now coming in, they're just like grabbing an ice lolly out of the freezer, not even asking, Yeah. So they're pushing it a little bit more, wanting to make their decisions. Like my daughter, she picks what she wants to wear on a weekend, and we have about 6 outfit changes every day. Yeah. my son is, even in the heat of Singapore, he wants to wear his jogging bottoms. That's how he feels safe and comfortable. And so there are some decisions that we kind of have to let go. But there are some decisions where it's like, you cannot have 3 ice lollies in a row. Like if you're hungry, let's eat some proper food, but we're having a bit more of a battle now. And so it's like, how can we help him make better decisions, that when he comes home from school and he's hungry, don't just go straight for the ice lollies. Yes. Okay. If you are going to make this decision yourself, then we've laid some food out for you. Choose the thing that's going to be better for you.
Yes. It is. That's a great question. I mean, I think it's, there's a couple of angles to that. So if we think about, as adults, how have we come to, if we look at your food choices, right? How do we make decisions around food choices? Possibly we have some rules, we want to eat more protein. That seems to be the thing right now. So we have that rule in our head, we're going to eat X amount of protein a day. And so when you make a food decision, you have that rule around, make sure there's some protein in there. And that partly is based on what other people have told you, But if out of experience you find that when you eat more protein, actually you notice that you feel better, that experience will help you make a better decision next time when you're faced versus, a bit of chocolate or, I don't know, some almonds. And your experience is often a much better guide for decisions than rules. Rules are inflexible. They're not adaptive. Some rules are really important for us never to bend. Like, always look both ways when you're crossing the road. You don't want to change that rule. That rule keeps you safe. But mostly rules get a bit too insensitive. Like they're not bendable enough. Like never eat chocolate is not a great rule. Like chocolate is wonderful. And can be great, great fun and enjoyment can come from eating chocolate. So it's not a useful rule. But inevitably, when we're talking to children, we tend to give them rules. And that can become too inflexible. And we actually want them to learn from experience more than by rules. Like if you think about, how to learn how to ride a bike, you can give them lots of rules, but ultimately they'll learn by pedaling, falling, hopefully not too badly, but it's the experience that teaches them. So with food, for example, after school, we want them to start tracking for themselves, like asking themselves some curious questions as, what's it like when I've eaten 3 ice creams? How do I feel? How does my body feel? Am I satisfied? And if the answer is yes, okay, let's see if that's true. Let's see if you find yourself hungry again in half an hour. Half an hour comes, they're hungry again and go, ooh, that's interesting. You were full half an hour ago, but now you're hungry. What does that tell you about the ice cream? So it's helping them to track, to be curious about how things are working out for themselves so that, move fast forward, they can start to make decisions about how they feel and how they see the world. The danger is that we don't teach them that they rely on others. And that's what we see, is that they rely on others to tell them what the right decision is. We see it a lot in anxiety. So you have certain, if you, work enough with humans, you'll see that temperament is a thing. Some children, some of us are born with a certain tendency, perhaps a more anxious tendency. And when you parent multiple children, you just see that. You have one child who's just running and throwing themselves at things, and you have another child that sort of holds himself back and thinks about it a bit more, slightly more anxious, let's say, or more preoccupied about things. And so for them, their tendency may be that they'll seek more reassurance. They'll check more. They'll go, is it okay if, or are you sure, or I don't know, all of this sort of what we call reassurance seeking. As a parent, it's easy to go, it'll be fine. You'll be fine. Or, just do this, don't think about it. And what we want to do is even more so for our children, if they do have an anxious temperament, is to get them to start trusting themselves. Is that to say, well, what do you think? How did it feel last time you asked your teacher for help? It was scary. Yes. And then what happened? Then it was okay. Oh, that's great. And that's how, again, we make decisions. We help them to start to think about their experience more. Teach them to think to their experience as really important information, because we always have 2 sources. Adults and children have 2 sources of information. What your mind tells you is going to happen, that may or may not be true. It may just be a story. And what your experience has told you is going to happen. Often our minds are so seductive that we listen more to our minds than to our experience. Especially those of us who are have a tendency to ruminate and think things through a lot. It tends to be our mind that dominates. And so your mind might tell your kid a story of, if you ask for help, your teacher will shout at you or will tell you what a silly question. But what does your experience tell you? Actually, my experience tells me my teacher is kind. I've seen her answer other children, and she's very thoughtful, or he's always said yes when other people have asked. Well, that's interesting. So how about we go with that and you test your idea about what's going to happen? And more we want our children to start to see that there's these two sources of information and that we don't always have to listen to what our minds are telling us. And that's the same as parents, right? We have two sources of information. We have our mind that says, if they go out in minus 35, they're going to get very, very sick. And then I'm going to have a nightmare of a holiday because I'm going to have to say, that's the story. Mm-hmm. And your experience may be that actually I used to go out and find it was incredibly cold and didn't last a minute. And so what do we use?
I guess it's easy sometimes as parents. I know I default to it sometimes, just like, don't do this.
Of course.
Because that is the easiest thing to do and to say, whereas actually the best form of teaching them is to walk them through all of that, I guess non-judgmentally either, I suppose, right? Not like I told you that would happen.
Oh my goodness.
But,
I know.
Yeah, no, it's an really interesting frame of reference. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that.
And I think, I'm a big supporter of parents. As a parent myself, I think we need to just be kind. Sometimes things just have to get done. And, you're rushing out to work and to school and we just have to get going. You're just going to put your shoes on and we're out of here. It's not an opportunity. It's not a teaching opportunity. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's just the way it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And then there's other times where we have a bit more, time, bandwidth, energy, where we can be more reflective. So I don't think we're looking for the perfect parent that gets it right all the time. In fact, one of my old mentors used to say, I pity the children with perfect parents because they don't get to see what it's like to make mistakes, to get upset, to repair, to redo. Redo is one of the most powerful parenting techniques, is the ability, and in relationships, is the ability to go, hang on a minute, that didn't come out the way I wanted it to. Can we redo? Or take a break and say, I just, got a bit too angry there.
It's one of the biggest learnings that I got from Good Inside, the book with Dr. Becky, and she's like a phenomenon now, right? She's everywhere. Yeah. She's done kind of all the podcasts, but that one of the biggest things that we can do as parents is learn how to repair.
Yeah.
And if you do kind of yell or do, actually going back and making amends.
Yeah. And amends doesn't have to be I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. I had a situation this morning with my teenager, my eldest, who is a phenomenal teacher, as most teenagers are. And I just got really frustrated with him. And I said to him, I really don't need a parenting lesson. He was telling me how to parent my daughter, who's 9. And I said, I really don't need a parenting lesson right now. And I was quite frustrated. And I went to the kitchen. I took a deep breath. I came out. He was looking down, didn't want to look at me. Obviously was, I don't know what was going through his mind. And then I started a conversation with him on something completely different. And I sort of rubbed his back and I wished him a good day. Now that is a repair without saying, I'm sorry, I got frustrated. It's like, it says to him, we're okay. It's okay here. Because I think that sometimes as parents, we take a lot of responsibility and we feel tremendous guilt. And I think we can be kind. It's okay. Being Chris McCurry, who I do the podcast with, he talks about, parenting being a wicked environment. And by that, he means that it's very unpredictable. One day one thing works and suddenly the next day it doesn't work anymore. And it's so changeable. And I think what we most need as parents is compassion and kindness. We work much longer hours than our parents ever did. We parent much more than our parents ever did. And it's hard. It's hard. Mm-hmm. And our kids need parents who are kind to themselves, not that get it right all the time.
Yeah, one thing I didn't realize as a parent is just what a blank slate kids are. So like when I would discipline or when I would say, did something wrong, how that reassurance part, because in my mind, I'm like, well, of course I love you. Like, I'm your dad. Like, and I didn't think that I needed to give that reassurance to them because in my mind, it's just always there. But I realized like, wait, I do need to do that. I do need to reassure them because it's not something that they intrinsically have.
So it's not very often that we get a psychologist and a physiologist together in the room. Arch enemies? Are you guys good?
It's yin and yang.
Yeah. But I'd love to know from a developmental psychology perspective, does a child's ability to make decisions actually evolve as their brain develops? And I suppose this is probably a question for both of you. About you from a physiology perspective.
Yeah, well, it's definitely not my area of expertise. I'll say like development. I do know like the child's brain is not an adult brain. But I know in psychology, way back when, I think we, viewed physiologically, we viewed kids as like little mini adults, which is just not the case, right? Yeah. And even from a physiological perspective, I guess the big thing that happens in children with our brains is, we've talked about before, is this neurological pruning, is how the brain is not as an organ reaching adulthood until our early 20s. And I've raised this concern many times. I'd love to get your thoughts on it too. Is my big concern with modern society is how that pruning happens. So how our brain becomes more efficient and develops its connections is based on activity and basically experience, what the child does, right? So that's why children who learn language very young, it lasts for so long because they made sure those networks were never degraded. But children today are facing so much more pressure, so much more cognitive load. Forget it, like systematic stress, just so much more cognitive load in their daily life, that I wondered, is it changing how their brains are developing as an organ? But yeah, I would love to get the flip side from your experience too. Do you think cognitive load that children face is changing kind of the foundations of their psychology?
I think what we are witnessing is, young people are more anxious. In fact, we know that in terms of risk factors for mental health, everybody's familiar with socioeconomic, sort of, poverty, living in a violent neighborhood, experiencing abuse. All of these are tremendous risk factors, what we call adverse childhood events. But now they've added attending a high-performing school as a risk factor for mental health.
Wow.
I know.
We actually spoke to, I forget who the guest was, and maybe it was off camera, but a physician who said that they could tell what school kids were going to in Singapore based on inflammation markers, just because they were so anxious that they could identify it was a high-performing private school because the kids are so stressed out. Yeah, wild. Yeah.
It is wild.
It's tough as a parent, though, too, because you want a good education, but I guess, something like that's wild.
Yeah. It is. And I mean, it's so in terms of a cognitive load, I think what we are doing is we're living in, what some have coined the toxic achievement culture. When you go to a high performance sort of school, grades are very, very important. It's all about the outcome. And children miss out on enjoying the process of learning and enjoying other interests. And there are some very academic kids who really thrive in those environments and can do very well. But there are kids who are not. And so we place them in these environments that really stretch them. And they start to internalize the message that they're not good enough. And that's where anxiety comes up, right? Anxiety is a belief usually that something terrible is going to happen. Usually it has two parts. It's that there's a catastrophic idea of what's going to happen. But the other side of anxiety that's just as important is that I will not be able to cope with the outcome. I'm not able to cope. And we want to work on both levels. We want our young people and even ourselves to challenge our catastrophic ideas. Is that really true? Or is it just a story my mind is telling me? And to internalize this belief that I can cope, that it's going to be okay. And in some of these very high-performing schools, of course, they're drilling these incredible outcomes. I mean, the grades are phenomenal that these schools are achieving. But some kids, it's too much. It's much more than they can actually cope with. And that's where anxiety comes in. It's like, I really can't cope with this load. It's too much. my challenges are real. They're not just imagined. This is unrealistic for me, for my skill set. And no matter how much tuition we put in, no matter how much extra, support we're giving them, it's still too much of a challenge. And that deprives them from learning that they are competent. Because they will be. There'll be lots of areas that they're competent in. Maybe it's music, maybe it's art, maybe it's mud huts, climbing trees, figuring out sequences. There's so many things that our children can learn to be capable at, and that actually we risk with some of the schools and some of the narrative of really restricting the range of success to just academic or just phenomenal musicians. And that sort of deprives them from really learning about themselves. And also, it's really not based on what we know ultimately makes us happy. Like the Harvard sort of adult study that they've been doing for the last sort of 75 over years, shows that those mostly men, now they've also got women in the study, but that they've evaluated, over the course of their life, what's ultimately made them happy is relationships, is the quality of their relationships. And so when I work with parents, I remind them about the quality of their relationship, because ultimately what we want to protect is our relationship, because that's what's going to make them happier. Their ability to have a solid relationship with us is paramount, whether they're getting, A's or D's at school, whether they've got brilliant friendships or not, because that is what's going to hold them through. They're going to come to us for help when they've got a good relationship. They will learn what it takes to have a good relationship. That will help them to have good relationships going forward. I don't think we're alone in this. We live in communities that tells us that that's the right thing to do. You go and you see friends and they'll talk about, exams or their extracurricular activities or, what's happening, very, very goal-oriented. There's not a lot of conversations sometimes on, what's been fun, what's been exciting, what's been, silly, what's been light, what's been connecting. So I think there is a lot in our community that keeps pushing us to do this, to focus on grades, like we're somehow failing our kids if we don't care enough about homework, if we're not putting them in tuition, that somehow we're the ones that are letting them down.
Oh, so much in there. I think it just keeps coming back to like one challenge that we're having with my son at the moment, who's 6, turning 7 this year. And he, for the last year, has not wanted to do his swimming class at school. He was doing everything he could to not do swimming. And we would phone the teachers and say, he doesn't want to do it, but if he changes his mind, that's okay. If he doesn't want to do it, it's fine to sit out. No amount of kind of encouragement from us or from the teachers is getting him. He's made this decision that he doesn't want to do swimming at school. And we're really trying to understand what that is. And he's not opening up to us. There is a grade element. He gets graded on this. What do we do? Do we continue to let him make the decision and say, as and when you're ready? That my instinct is saying, okay, you don't do swimming, you watch from the sidelines, and as and when you feel ready, you can start again when you feel ready. Or do we push? Do we make him do it? Like, what's the answer here? Like, I don't know. I just don't know. And it's a real battle that we've been having for a while now.
Lots of parents are having these battles and they're choosing, like they say,
so many battles.
Yeah, so many battles.
I know. To be fair, it's one of many.
And some of us have more sort of strong-minded children. And honestly, there's something quite wonderful about having a strong-minded child. Like I would prefer that to to having a child that can't express their opinion, can't assert. Like that feels much more concerning to me. Easier to parent, but more concerning in the long run. Like you want your kid to be able to speak up when they're not happy about something.
Yeah.
And to be able to say no and assert it. So I remind myself in those moments, I'm like, I want this. It's not so bad. It's hard, but it's actually a good thing that they can.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'd have to know the whole context. Like, this is the annoying thing of being a psychologist is that, there's always a it depends answer. It depends on how much else he's saying no to.
Yeah.
If all of the answers to your requests is a no, then we have a problem. We have to get better at saying yes, because that suggests that there's, difficulties in tolerating frustration and tolerating, experiences that feel uncomfortable. And we know that being able to feel comfortable, feeling uncomfortable, creates some resilience. We want that. But I would think that if you look at the bigger picture, and if generally he's mostly saying yes, even when he doesn't want to do things, then I would choose my battles, because I don't think you can make him do it. I don't even know what that looks like. It probably looks really ugly and unpleasant for everybody. And I don't know what the consequences to that would be. Like, is it really worth it to everything else that will come with it? I do think we just have to be mindful that it isn't too rewarding to say no. Like, you don't, like, for example, children who stop going to school, you've got a problem with that. When we evaluate that as a psychologist, you want to think about the picture as a whole. If they're not going to school, what is happening at school that they're trying to avoid, but also what's happening at home that feels much better than being at school. Some kids who don't go to school, they stay home and they watch TV all day because the parents are at work and, eat snacks and have a great old time. Well, that's a problem. Home has become too much of a positive experience where school feels quite, jarring. Let's make school better and home less comfortable. It is, of course, important to think about what else is happening for him when he's not doing swimming. He's clearly avoiding something that feels quite uncomfortable with the swimming. And we want to understand what that is. But we want to make sure that the alternative isn't too comfortable, because he'll never decide to go swimming. And, maybe he has to do something. We talk about non-preferred activities. He has to do a non-preferred activity when he's not swimming.
What you said around achievements really hit me, because that's a big thing I noticed in Singapore here is people equate achievement with happiness.
Yeah.
They think that when I accomplish something, I'm happy. And it was shocking to me when I got here, especially among males, like male friends, his questions was never like, how are you? It was more like what are you? Right? It was about, what are you doing at work? What was your bonus? It was achievement centered. Whereas I found a big gap in just happiness. Like, happiness seems not to be a point of achievement or a goal that I found, especially among men in Singapore. Why do you think that's happening? Because I've never met so many wildly successful, unhappy people, which is really sad. Because what are you chasing then? Yeah. But is it cultural? Is it just why are people chasing something other than happiness? Maybe that's a super difficult question, but when I look to my kids, I want to make sure, because I love the line, and maybe I'm going to get it wrong, but I love you more than your homework. I forget your exact what you said there, but what's off course with that? Why aren't people chasing being happy?
I think in Singapore, and I don't think it's just Singapore, I look at, the US and the UK. My mother's Spanish, so we go back to Spain a lot. I don't see it as much in Spain, but I do see it in the big cities, definitely London. What I hear about in the US is this sort of relentless pursuit of success, and that is like our safety card. Like, that means that we're going to be okay as long as we're successful. And whilst happiness, we don't really know how to be happy, so we can't necessarily go for that. But if we're successful, there is the recipe for success. It just means work harder and earn more and, get more, climb that career ladder. And I think that there feels like there's more control over that potentially. But unfortunately, what we find is that we're running with the goalposts in front of us. We never reach that success. Because like you say, we live in communities that are incredibly successful. And there's always somebody else who's more successful than you. And I see that in the clinic room, these sort of unrelenting standards. People will say, oh, but, I should be doing more. But it always depends on who you compare yourself to. And we always compare up. We never compare down. That's the kind of monkey we are. That's what's got us to the moon and, got us to AI. It's because it's never enough. It's never enough. We want more. And we just have to learn to hold that lightly because, that's how burnout happens. And that's how we get miserable. So our brains, I do like sort of reminding myself and my clients where, our brains evolved. Our brains evolved when we were sort of running around being chased by ferocious animals. So the primary job of our brain is to keep us safe and not eaten. It's not to make us happy. Our brain is not interested in whether we're happy or not. It's interested in whether we survive long enough to have a baby. Our sort of ancestors were the ones hiding in the caves. Whenever they heard a rustling of the leaf, would run. Those of us, who were sort of more optimistic and were smelling the flowers and sort of looking out at the beautiful stars got eaten. They're not in our DNA.
Yeah.
So
Fair.
We have to work against a long, old limbic system, the back of our brain, that is constantly telling us about threats that may or may never happen, including success, and I think it's, par for the course to learn how to navigate having this mind that's constantly, focusing on the negatives, telling us, what we haven't got, telling us what we still need to do, always threat oriented, versus helping us to think about the positives, helping us to savor the moments. That just doesn't come naturally to us.
Yeah, I think as a parent, it's one of my biggest struggles is how to position because I wasn't raised that way, to position the kid to pursue happiness. And success can bring happiness. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean that they're mutually exclusive by any means. But it was never focused when I was growing up for myself. Yeah. It was grades. It was academics. It was sport. It was all of those things. And then I guess you learn to be happy when you do succeed. There's that component. But yeah, I just think sometimes culture, people just get so off track and I just wonder what we're chasing.
Yeah, absolutely. I sometimes wonder why it is in Singapore is that, we're working a lot. So our kids are often, home alone or, with help, but they're not entertained. And I think that's why tuition is so common here because parents don't want the kids just at home. They want them doing stuff. But I think we have to think about giving them more opportunities to be free to go to the park, to run around in the streets, just like we did. That was my afternoons. My afternoons was, I'd have to get back for dinner. And dinner was when the lights came on in the street. And that was it. That was all the structure. And I'd be left to do homework and to figure things out for myself. But as a community, people were looking out. I used to always get annoyed with the neighbors who always knew where I was. And that somehow came back to my mom. And our children don't get that. Like children don't play in the streets. They are busy. They're overscheduled. They don't get that freedom. So how do they figure out what makes them happy? We figure that out from doing stuff and doing stuff that doesn't make us happy and realizing that actually we're not so happy. And as parents, letting them figure that out for themselves, getting them to understand, what is fun for them, what's their passion. William Sticksrod talks about we're building a brain when we're parenting, in that the brain is growing throughout the developmental years. And how we build a brain is through them learning about themselves. The pruning process is done, through experiences. You're learning stuff. You're figuring things out for yourself. And as long as you build a brain that knows that they can be autonomous, competent, and they can relate, you're building a good brain. And that doesn't need to be academically. It can be, learning how to play the guitar or, figuring out how to climb the most trees in the least amount of time, whatever that is a sense that I am capable of doing really cool stuff and having a great time. And that they will take on for the rest of their lives is knowing things about themselves that we need to learn through adolescence. That is a key time to figure out who we are, what we stand for, what kind of friends we like, what kind of music we like, what don't we like. And all of that is done through living. And so coming back to this original question that you asked me around, cognitive load, what we're finding with young people is that they spend so much time in their academics, they don't get to do this. And so then they get to university and, they'll drop out because they can't handle it. Because it's actually maybe not what they're interested in. Or even if they're not interested in, they're not having a great time because they're not used to doing things for themselves. Or it's really hard to connect with others with different interests because they haven't been doing any of that during their teenage years because they've been so busy studying.
I've got one question, which is how can we help our children, our neurodivergent children, make better decisions? Particularly looking at children with ADHD who maybe lack impulse control, who are quick to make decisions, who often make quite unsafe decisions, and can have quite an immediate reaction to a bad decision as well. They know when they've made a bad decision and they often know quite quickly. And then that can kind of spill into an emotional state. How can we help our neurodivergent children make good decisions?
That's quite a big question, but I'll try and chunk it up so that it's actually my answer is useful. I think, if we think of neurodivergence as, one of the things we know is that the sort of prefrontal cortex, the front of the brain, what we call the CEO, and you'll know this better than me, doesn't function in exactly the same way as the neurotypical. For example, like you were saying with the ADHDers, we find that their impulse control is poorer, but often it's because they are interested by, things that are novel, things that are exciting, things that are challenging, more than the uninteresting things. And unfortunately, school is full of uninteresting things and not so much excitement and novelty and challenge. And so when we think of impulse control with ADHD, sometimes it's simply that they're being drawn to the things that we don't want them to be drawn to. So I think knowing a little bit about that for parents is really helpful because often we think of the neurodivergent community as oppositional when it's not. It's just making a choice. And we are saying their choice is poor, but for them it's not the poor choice, it's the better choice. So I think as educators and as parents, we need to help them to start to notice that. So what makes them more impulsive? Often there are things like, how they've slept or, what they're choosing to eat or how they've organized, structured their day. I recommend that kids do the fun stuff later on in the day because often in the morning, things are easier for the neurodivergent kids because their energy is higher. Some of the funner stuff we leave for later on in the day because those are easier to do because it's fun and they're driven. So helping them to organize their day so that it is consistent with some of the things that we know work better for them. With the neurodivergent community, it's particularly important to help them to be more introspective around how things are working. So, if I never do my homework because I'm always gaming, what is that like for you? What's it like when you turn up to school and you don't have anything to turn in? And they go, it's fine. Oh, okay. All right. Trust them that it's fine until you get evidence of the contrary. If over time, actually, you're starting to get reports from teachers that it's not fine, you bring that to them and you go, well, I have this dilemma. Your teachers are saying this to me and you're saying it's fine. Something doesn't make sense. Help me. So it's like being an ally. We think of coaching, even, especially with a neurodivergent. We think of parenting, especially with a neurodivergent, as coaches. You know, we're their allies. We're there to support them. We're there to scaffold. Scaffolding is a sort of a developmental concept where, you know, we help children by adding information or support that they need until they can do it themselves. And then we remove the scaffold, because ultimately we are trying to build the sense of autonomy and competence. And that is with, you know, all our children. And so with a neurodivergent, we may need a little more scaffolding. We may need a bit of prompting. We may need, little checklists in the morning for them to help them be successful. Because if we're always stepping in, they don't figure out what they need in order to be successful at packing their bags, at wearing their shoes to school, whatever it might be. We want to help them to then be successful.
Mm. I'm just like looking at you there going, okay, I need more. I need help.
So much. Yeah, so much, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there's a lot. I definitely remind us of the name of that book again that you've referred to.
The Self-Driven Child?
The Self-Driven Child.
Oh, it's awesome.
Okay, I'm definitely going to get that book as well. I feel like we're out of time, but honestly, like I could just listen to you all day, and I'm like, so just everything that you say, I'm like, okay, I want to try this, and that's really true.
Thank you.
So really, thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure at some point we might come back and say, okay, how do adults make better decisions?
Part 2
from a psychology point of view. Yes. We talk a lot on this podcast about the physiology, about cognitive overload and decision fatigue, and how that's impacting us as adults. And we do talk about how that's impacting children. Yeah. But yeah, I think there's so many things in this conversation that, you know, we haven't even thought of.
Yes.
That's an important one. Maybe the most important conversation. Yeah.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Fascinating.
And for everyone like listening, we will link to Emma's profile, Oz Therapy, and Emma's podcast as well, because there's just some amazing content on there for you to have a look. And for everyone listening, thank you so much. Please, any comments, questions, as always, add below. And we always say, make every decision count. I don't think I'd ever say to a child, make every decision count, because that feels like pressure, you know. And I think the biggest learning from this episode has been actually give them the freedom to make their own decisions, but also to mess up, to fail, to learn. And that itself is almost, you know, just as important.
100%. And I'd say that for parents too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not, it feels like everything that we do is so important and so meaningful, and really, you know, it's okay. And sometimes it's our experience that tells us what our kids need. We read all these books. I remember before we wrote, we've written a handful of books ourselves, actually. So we've added, I think, sometimes to the problem of there being so many parenting books. But, you know, there are over 60,000 parenting books. So what that tells me is that there isn't a right way to parent. I do worry that we're losing our intuition as parents. You know, it suddenly becomes so complicated and so scary to be a parent that, you know, I remember asking my dad, I've said this many times, you know, I asked him when I was studying, you know, did you ever question your parenting? And he looked at me like I had 3 heads. And I thought, you've never questioned your parenting? And he said, no. And I think how much we question. I question my parenting. And I supposedly trained, you know, and my children will question my parenting too. Like it's really, it's a tough climate to be a parent. So it's okay if you don't have the answers. It's okay if you make mistakes. I think we just have to be kind.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much, Emma. Appreciate it.